This is part 3 of our analysis of the phrase Baruch Atoh Hashem. We saw in part 1 the Abudiram traced this phrase back to a pasuk in Tehilim, Baruch Atoh Hashem lamdeni chukecha, blessed are you Hashem, teach me your statutes. So let's analyze it. First question is, what is this parak of Tehilim about? What is the context here? Remember, according to our method of tefillah analysis, we look at the pasuk in its original context, understand it there, and then see how that impacts our understanding of it in tefillah. Question 2, what are chukim in this context? We might know what chukim are in general, but what do they mean here? 3, what exactly is David HaMelech asking for when he says, Lamdeni chukecha, teach me your statutes? And 4, what is the relationship between the two halves of the pasuk? It's not readily evident. Okay, for question 1, usually we would learn through the whole parak, or at the very least read through it. But this happens to be the longest parak in Tehilim and the longest parak in all of Tanakh. So we're going to cheat. We're going to use the Radak's intro. So the Radak says as follows: this psalm is very distinguished. David authored it alphabetically with 8 pasukim for each letter. Each pasuk contains the terms derech, Torah, eidos, pikudim, mitzvah, amira, dibur, mishpat, tzedek, emuna, and chukim. These terms refer to the components of the entire Torah. So each pasuk has at least one of these terms, and the Radak then goes on to define these terms. We're not going to do all of them. Let's just look at a couple. Chukim are the mitzvos whose reasons are not revealed. So like milk and meat, like the sacrifices, where they have reasons, but they're not obvious. Dibur and Amira are collective terms which refer to all of the mitzvos. So up until this point, the Radak has defined all the terms in relation to mitzvos. But now he says, he also mentions Dibur and Amira in reference to divine promises. So that's not mitzvos, that's hashgacha pratis, that's God's personal supervision. And he used Dibur in reference to his will in the creation of the universe. Likewise, Emuna refers to the fulfillment of his word in the creation of the universe. And that's not a reference to hashgacha pratis, that's a reference to hashgacha klalis, to the laws of nature. So we see that the mitzvos, we see that these terms can refer either to the mitzvos or to personal supervision or to laws of nature. Okay, now the Radak gives a very important methodological principle for understanding the parak. He says when he mentioned each of these terms in every pasuk, his intention was not in reference to that term alone. Rather, his intent was to refer to a single term and likewise all the others. So in Talmudic terminology, we call this lav davka. So what does this mean practically? It means that in our pasuk, when he says, Lamdeni chukecha, teach me your statutes, it doesn't specifically mean chukecha. You could insert any of those terms. Lamdeni mitzvosecha, lamdeni mishpatecha, lamdeni imrasecha. Each pasuk applies to all of the other terms. Lastly, he ties this back to the theme of the parak. There are pasukim which he said at a time of his trouble when he fled or during other troubles. And when he composed this psalm, he included these pasukim in it because that trouble distracted him from being involved in Torah and in wisdom. So answer to question number 1, what's this about as a whole, is David staying involved with Torah and Chachma despite obstacles. By Torah, we mean mitzvos, and by Chachma, we mean the study of God's ways in nature and in hashgacha pratis. What are the chukim in this context? So even though the Radak defined the term chukim as a technical term, he says you could plug in all of the terms here. So really, in this pasuk, it means he wants Hashem to teach him all of his ways in Torah, in hashgacha pratis, and in hashgacha klalis. Okay, for the last 2 questions, we need to look at the Ibn Ezra, who says, because I gratefully acknowledge that you are the source of blessing, therefore teach me your statutes, and this is the reward that I seek from you. So according to Ibn Ezra, David HaMelech is saying, as a reward for recognizing Hashem as the source of all blessing, Hashem should grant him knowledge of his ways. Okay, now how does this impact our recitation of the phrase Baruch Atoh Hashem in brachos? So we know that a bracha is a recognition of Hashem as the source of good. But what this phrase does in Tehilim is it takes that good and it frames it in terms of the ultimate objective. So for example, when you eat an apple, you're recognizing Hashem as the source of the apple. But when you think of this pasuk, you're realizing the goal of the apple is not the physical pleasure I'm about to get. It's to provide me with sustenance so that I can be involved in learning Hashem's ways, in seeking knowledge of Hashem. Same thing with a mitzvah. When you say a bracha on a mitzvah, you're not just recognizing Hashem as the source of the good of that mitzvah. You're recognizing that the purpose of that mitzvah is to facilitate your pursuit of knowledge of Hashem. And likewise for birchas hayira, when you say a bracha, let's say on thunder, or the brachos in the morning, you're not just recognizing the Hashem as the source of good in the world, and that's the end of the story. You're prompting yourself to seek further knowledge of Hashem based on that recognition. So as I advised in my second video, when you say Baruch Atoh Hashem, this pasuk should be like in the back of your mind and subtly framing the way you relate to the phenomenon you're saying the bracha on.